Good afternoon. Welcome to the session about the why and how of gender lens investing. My name is Florian Berndt. I'm a senior advisor at GIZ. This session will have two parts. In the first half an hour, we will focus on the why gender lens investing, and we will talk about women's financial inclusion and gender finance in more general terms. This will include insights from a WSBI's member survey regarding the WFI codes. And we will also have brand new news from an e-MFP Action Group member survey regarding gender practices. I'm very happy to have two inclusive and sustainable finance experts with me. They have a lot of experience regarding women's financial inclusion and gender finance. Please put your hands together for Veselina Angelov. She's the program director of Scale to Serve, the World Savings and Retail Banking Institute. And another round of applause for Juana Ramirez. She is stakeholder coordinator at the Luxembourg Sustainable Finance Initiative and co-head of the e-MFP Action Group on gender lens investing. And you can find more information on their impressive credentials in the conference app. Let us start with a quick look back at the European Microfinance Award 2 years ago. In 2022, the award was for financial inclusion that works for women. So it highlighted organizations working in financial inclusions with the aim to address and meet challenges and aspiration of women's financial inclusion, but with approaches which go beyond the traditional gender outreach strategies. And when looking at the good practices of the applications, 3 main approaches or general approaches emerged how service providers can do this. So the first is meeting women's financial needs through product and services. And for that, it's good to have an in-depth analysis of the gendered context and segmentation of women and men as clients. The second good approach is mainstreaming of gender equity and leadership within the institutions. So to promote, integrate gender equality perspective in all stages and levels of a project, of a policy or a program. And thirdly, to empower women with non-financial needs. And these approaches are more and more applied. We are all waiting for the next global Findex data to see if the gender gap will continue to narrow. Looking at the global gender gap reports from the World Economic Forum from 2023 and 2024, we see that the gender gaps are more or less stable. And regarding economic participation and opportunity for women in the last 2 years, the progress has only been marginal. So there wasn't no specific focus on financial services. Last month, SIGE published a working paper looking at the next chapter for women's financial inclusion in order to move towards a visible step change. And there they proclaim a whole of a market approach with intentional and concerted action. And there are 5 levers are being stressed, and promoting an inclusive investment environment is one of them. But what does gender lens investing actually mean? I mean, there is no single or industry-wide definition, but some define it as a strategy or approach in investing that takes into consideration gender-based factors across the whole investment process in order to advance gender equity and also to get better informed investment decisions. So is it a successful strategy? According to the Global Impact Investing Network in Focus report from this year, 90% of gender investors meet or even exceed their financial expectations. And 97% say we are achieving our impact targets. And by applying a gender lens, 3 out of 4 investors say, okay, we can even have greater impact, and more than half make both ends meet, so better impact and better financial outcomes. So obviously, a key is gender finance or gender lens investment. Stupid, some might say. But why are then we sitting here on a Friday afternoon instead of spending time with family, friends, or just making money? Well, the world is not on track with SDG 5 gender equality. Over 2 billion women are still denied access to equal economic opportunities. And last year's study said, okay, the financing gap for women entrepreneurs is around 1.7 trillion USD, or an additional $360 billion of investment are needed every year to close the gender gap. And in 3-4 years, the female consumers will control around 15 trillion of global consumer spending. So this is the world's largest emerging market, and the female economy represents a market more than twice as big as the market of India and China combined. So there's a lot to gain for investors and for women. And according to various estimates, closing the gender gap could add between 6 to 28 trillion to annual global GDP. And we heard it in this morning's session, there are a number of interrelated reasons why women do not get the capital they need. Women are less likely to own property, so they lack the collateral for a loan. They are also less likely to have a bank account and a formal credit history, so they are seen as a riskier investment. And on top of that, there are the sticky gender norms and unconscious biases from actors who are used to dealing with men, and they are then skeptical about lending money to women. It's also that opening a bank account for women doesn't always translate into a deeper engagement or more trust in the sector. And also customized financial solutions are still limited. But while progress in the gender lens investment field is undeniable, challenges remain, and gender investors face many of the challenges which impact investors face in general. So the most widely noted challenge is the fragmentation across impact measurement frameworks, which over 90% of the investors acknowledge. And almost all regulators now have a national financial inclusion strategy in place with targets for women, but only 1/3 of the low-income countries have gender disaggregated data for the demand side, and when it comes to the supply side, it's even lower. There are efforts underway, like the We Finance or Investment Code, which seek to capture more data, but a lot more needs to be done at all dimensions of gender lens investment. The most significant challenge reported about by 1/3 of the gender lens investments was finding suitable exit options. And then some investors or loan offerers just don't see a funding gap. Like 8 out of 10 say, okay, women get the capital they need or even more. And of course, this leads then to an underinvestment, and some of it is an unconscious bias. And then we have the fragmentation of initiatives. There are different platforms and networks around, and it would be better to align and integrate them. And I think that's also the beauty of the European Microfinance Week, which brings together a lot of these actors in the genderless investment world. So while gender investors report optimistic trends regarding increased professional skills and better research, the industry still has a way to go until many incorporate a gender lens at the organizational or investment decision level. Before now hearing more about the service for the different members, I would like to ask my panelists, Veselina and Juana, what is your members' experience regarding the European Microfinance Award recommendations from 2022? So it's about product and services, mainstreaming generally at the whole level of the institution, and combining non-financial with financial services. Any lessons or views from your side?
Thank you, Florian. Well, actually talking to this audience and from my experience, what I can say is that it is acknowledged that there is a significant financial access gap affecting women globally. and that if we do not address this issue seriously, it's going to have terrible consequences for economic growth and social inequality worldwide, and particularly in the context of climate change and biodiversity loss, the war, and economic and social distress. This is no longer something that here in this community we do not acknowledge. And so investing in women is key to address the sustainable development goals. This is something that I think it is, in my experience, something that is acknowledged in this community. But there is also this challenge that in order to this agenda, we only have 6 years. Is only 6 years left, and we still have 5 trillion investment gap missing in order to put it in place. And so we actually need to realize that there is a convergence, in my experience, between the climate finance agenda, the biodiversity protection agenda, and these ideas of tackling inequalities. This is converging, and there is this nexus between gender and climate finance, gender and biodiversity finance, and the financial inclusion sector has a critical role to play there. And so the idea of having a gender lens investment action group and gathering the experience of this sector through this initiative is to think together on solutions on how to channel more capital for women entrepreneurs, because these are always been our target, and for businesses that prioritize gender equity and social inclusion. So this is, in my experience, what I'm seeing. Also, I had the opportunity to be at the COP16 with civil society, and women and indigenous people are constantly asking for direct access to funding. And so this is a question for this community, what we're doing about it. And what I'm seeing from DFIs and institutions that are represented within this network is that they are financing civil society organizations, women rights organizations directly in the field. There are structures that are growing with governance, from community-led governance. So I see a lot of momentum in the field, and I think it's worth sharing this with this community through a group as the one that we are forming all together, because this is the objective, to learn from each other.
Yeah, so WSBI is a network of financial institutions, and we have some 70% of the 1.7 billion customers that the network members are serving residing in rural areas. 49% of them roughly are women. So these are people particularly hit by climate events that we see increasing. These women work on small farm plots and have very irregular income streams. So their foremost need is to smoothen these income streams, build resilience, and sustain their business activities, especially during shocks. And as a secondary goal, they need credit to invest in growth of their business activities. All the institutions are deposit taking. And we've seen that up to 49% of the savings of these women go into business investments. So that tells us that credit is not necessarily offered in a way that it meets the needs of these women. We see that credit is very often too expensive, not flexible, too short term, or not available at all. And so we think for a successful microcredit offer, it is best if it goes alongside savings. A lot of our institutions do linkage with the informal sector to on-lend to these groups at an affordable rate, or they digitize group savings or individual savings to build the credit history that is so desperately needed. This works best in partnership with community support organizations that can provide the skill sets that are needed. What we also see is that platform services are of increased benefit. So platforms through which women that are digitally savvy can apply for credit, open an account, but also have access to non-financial farm services. And as we see climate shocks increasing, if these platforms can also offer access to insurance and information about soil management and water irrigation techniques, they help with decision-making processes and have a huge potential in increasing the productivity of these rural women. We also think that these platforms have a huge potential for gender lens investing, as they provide useful impact data for de-risk adaptation lending.
And as you said, I mean, your members are savings and retail banks and MFIs, and you're working worldwide. WSBI signed the Women Entrepreneurs Finance Code. So I'm looking forward to insights you have on gender finance and data that you can share with us regarding FSPs and their clients.
Yeah, so what I was talking about earlier is how we work on the ground in collecting impact data through platforms from financial institutions. But as a global network that operates in 78 countries through 103 financial institutions, we also collect data at global level. And we have revamped the way we are collecting data from our financial institutions with a focus on assessing the SDG impact. Because 49% of our customer base are women, and that translates into 500 million, we have last year become one of the first global signatories of the so-called WFI Code, Women Entrepreneur Finance Code. It's a global stakeholder initiative that aims at understanding and collecting data-driven evidence from the financial sector to understand the barriers faced by an estimated 400 million women in enterprises globally. And in a second step, then to channel financing through the multilateral development banks to help overcome these financing gaps. The code is currently piloted in 24 countries. This week, as a matter of fact, in Nigeria. It's very much a top-down approach where the World Bank that leads the WFI Code initiative engages with the national governments and stakeholders to launch the code and implement the activities. But there can also be a bottom-up approach where financial institutions in countries, and that is not limited to the pilot countries, can take the lead in public-private partnerships to launch the code at national level. So what is the code? The code is a set of some 40 indicators that we at WSBI integrated with all our members for the first time this year. And I would like to share some results with you. So what we saw is that 47% of the businesses that have an account are women-led amongst our network members. 41% of the loans that go to businesses go to women-led enterprises. Our network partners, it turns out, seem to better serve women-led micro enterprises. This is 42% compared to 38% women-led small and medium-sized businesses. The WSBI code also looks at the number and the value of loan applications, approval rates, and outstanding loans. Here we have 48% for women-led micro enterprises. That's the loan applications, 55% approval rates of loans to micro enterprises in the hands of women, and 38% of outstanding loans. So these shares turn out to be lower for the larger businesses, which suggests that the businesses served by our network members face a greater financing gap. So small and medium-sized businesses face a greater financing gap than the micro enterprises. Not surprisingly, the NPL ratios for women-led micro and small and medium-sized enterprises are lower than for their male counterparts. So we're talking here of 1.2, between 1.2 and 1.8%. But what we also see, and this may not come as a surprise, that the value of money channeled through women in enterprises remains much lower than for their male counterparts. More insights into the WSBI code analytics and also the impact on other social development goals beyond the gender equality can be found in the brochure that we lay out. So that shows an assessment of the G impact that the network of WSBI members is making. It's on the table outside. You also have access to the QR code, and I'll be happy to share a link for those of you who are interested. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you for these insights. And Juana, you're co-heading the action group on gender lens investing. It's a new action group, and we just started a survey. I think it's still ongoing, but curious to hear what are the first insights or what news can you share with us in this regard?
Sure. So yes, this is a new action group. It's a new initiative hosted by the EMFP, and we have had the interest of around 30 members. And the idea was to start by mapping what EMFP members are doing, what are their experiences in gender lens investment and gender finance. And for that, we did this survey that it is still running. We have a 29% response of people that are still filling in the responses, but we have early results today of 15% of the members that have participated, which are represented mostly by DFIs and NGOs, as well as impact fund managers. And the other type of organizations that are participating are basically foundations and digital application providers, cooperatives, and humanitarian organizations. So the survey is still open. It will be open until the end of the month for those who have not yet finish the responses. Please do so, and the ones that have not yet started, please, you're invited to share with us your experiences on gender lens investment and gender finance. And so the early findings are in terms of the strategies of gender lens investing, the majority of members, 23% of members, are focusing on investment funds that target companies founded by women or that have a important representation of women in leadership. 80% are providing products and services that are benefiting women. And 40% of members responding are focusing on SDG and ESG aligned strategies looking to positively impact women. However, there's a 13% still learning how to do this and training their workforce on how to develop gender lens strategies and approaches. And if we take into account those who are not approaching the women's market within e-MFP, the reasons for this are mostly the fact that there is no alignment at the level of top management of the interest of looking specifically in the women market or have a specific women focus. And so this is a common challenge that we have found in this area of research, and it kind of explains the other reasons why there is not necessarily a lot of investment in capacities to build systems that can segment portfolios and create, and there are nascent strategies for the moment. In terms of the implementation of policies and taking into account the recommendation of mainstreaming gender equity and social inclusion, we wanted to assess how our members putting in place gender balance policies. And so although we have for 15% of the members responding that are implementing these policies at the whole institutional level, from the board to the to no management roles, the majority of organizations responding are not implementing these policies at all. These policies do not exist. And there is an important, those that are doing it are also doing it only at the senior and executive level. So what we would like to do next is to better understand with follow-up calls what does this tells us about the structure of the organizations that we are serving and the limitations they have, or the strategies, why to have policies at all levels but not at the board level, or only at specific segments. And then considering, we also wanted to know if members are measuring impact, positive and a negative impact in the women's market. And so the half of the members that have responded are doing it. They have theories of change and they are tracking progress in order to improve practices. But there is a 40% that is not doing it. And there is a 10% that is doing it just for specific projects. And concretely, in terms of the non-financial services that the members are proposing to empower women and girls, the most representative are in terms of training for entrepreneurship and access to specific mentoring. But there is also, it's interesting to see that there is a training for climate resilience initiatives. And also there are members providing training in legal advocacy and e-commerce, use of e-commerce platforms, which is important for entrepreneurship of women, and it's innovative and it's something useful. Okay, I'm just done. Just to tell you that the majority of the products and services that are present within the network are lending and savings accounts, but there is also interesting 13% of members proposing specific climate resilience products, and also focusing on housing, on education, and on health and insurance, agroclimatic insurance, which is also interesting. So these are early results, and we are looking forward to have more responses to be able to have a very nice report to share with all the community next year. Thanks to the work of Ligia Castro, that's also a consultant active in the Gender Lens Investment Action Group, that is being very thoroughly analyzing and providing inputs on the responses.
Thank you, and please keep on submitting your data. And if there are some sections you don't have an answer, just skip it. Huh? Yeah, I mean, there are many sections. Before handing over to our colleagues for the second part, just some quick answers. Maybe what are your 2-3 top recommendations you have regarding gender lens in investing? Anything which comes to your mind?
Yeah, so Joanna mentioned it earlier that we think that gender lens investing needs to go hand in hand with de-risk climate adaptation lending. And so as we try to mobilize guarantees and credit lines for our member institutions, we need to get a better understanding on how these guarantees through payment holidays and stretched maturities can be redesigned to better meet rural women's needs. Also, we see a lot of attempts now to do lending through larger financial institutions that can do the local currency hedging and then on lend to the smaller financial institutions. And here it could be helpful to understand what works, what doesn't. Also, we have a couple of financial institutions that we can help with mobilizing local currency. And here again, what are the best mechanisms then to on lend in a flexible, affordable manner to rural women. And lastly, we think that guarantees bundled with impact metrics are a powerful tool to help women to take controlled risk and break free from climate vulnerability. So if the GLI can work towards a more harmonized approach in terms of what metrics are, so social impact and green impact metrics that are both useful for the financial institutions, but also DFIs and other funders, that could be very helpful.
Okay. What are your top recommendations in a nutshell?
I think to follow up on that, I was just having a discussion about this, the approach to develop good EMM practices. And in that sense, I do believe that we should do more, as we do for products, a co-design between partners, clients, and providers, co-design the products, also co-design these EMM tools that are challenging and that need for multiple iterations. And so we do need to do this in a collaborative way, because it's the best way of collecting data that is missing, that is costly, but at the same time to learn. So it is a process of co-design. I think that should be very much a priority. And the fact of being in the field, I believe there's a lot of things going on. There's a lot of experience from institutions and from and there is the need. So I believe yeah, we don't have to only decide from here what needs to be done. Partners know, trust them and work with them. I believe that's my biggest recommendation.
Thank you. So far for part one, we are handing now over to the gender lens investors and Dina as moderator. Stay tuned. It's just changing of chairs.
Maybe everyone can stand up for 1 second, stretch your legs. We're in the last, the last run here. A few more sessions. There we go. It's a nice full room. It's good to see so many people hanging on to talk about gender lens investing. We have one colleague who is going to be coming in virtually. So I just want to make sure that she's patched in. Lisa, I see you there. Can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you. I'm very large on that screen.
I can't hear you, but can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, great.
That's a very big picture.
Starting with the right foot. No?
Yeah, there's a delay.
Maybe while we're getting settled, could I just have a show of hands in the room? Who among us are impact investors? Hands in the air, impact investors? All right. Technical service providers? And investee companies, financial institutions, SMEs? Not many, none. Okay. All right, a mixed group. So thanks very much again and welcome. My name is Dina Bergiorgi and I run a consulting firm that focuses on gender smart integration, supporting impact investors and investee companies, specifically financial institutions, take a more gender integrated approach to their operations. So thank you to the previous panel for kind of setting up the why and around women's financial inclusion. Some of the gains that we've made over the last several decades. I mean, I myself have been in financial inclusion and since the early days of microfinance, so quite a few decades. And we've been talking about this for a long time. And clearly from the data, there's still a lot of work to be done. It's interesting, there's still quite a lot of challenges, still not surprisingly around buy-in and sort of the need for having a very gender intentional approach in our work, and the needs for more intentional strategies such as gender lens investing to really make sure that that gap in capital for women entrepreneurs, but also for better outcomes for women and meeting the SDGs are being met. So this last session, I'm happy to we have kind of a range of ecosystem actors on the panel, representing fund managers, but also TA providers, coming at it from different perspectives about what have been some, in terms of the how of gender lens investing, how we're making that a reality, what has been the practice on the ground, and maybe one more data point to just kind of add into the ones that were shared previously, is that even though the impact investing space has been growing healthily, over the last 10 years, and the recent GIN numbers, we have a compounded growth rate of 21% over the last 5 years, with about $1.5 trillion in assets under management for the impact investing space. Out of that, for what estimates we can get from the gender lens investing space, it's still under less than 1% of that. So just to kind of keep it in perspective, there's a lot of discussion on the importance of gender lens investing. We have a lot of momentum and there's been a lot of growth. but there are still, challenges to scaling that business up and getting that capital there. So the panel, we're going to take a page a little bit from yesterday's FDP session. I like that very much. We have the four panelists will kind of present a bit on their perspective of what they're doing. And then we'd like to open it up for questions first from the audience. We have also some questions we can banter around, but be prepared, because I think it's also, important to hear what's on your mind in this space, because as was mentioned, there's a big diversity in definitions of gender lens investing and expectations. So also good to hear what's on your mind. So I am going to start with Lisa Willems, who should be, I don't see you anymore, Lisa, who's the president of the Alpha Mundi Foundation. And they are, and Alpha Mundi is an impact investor that actually integrates a gender lens across all their investment strategies. So they don't have necessarily a GLI fund, but they work through a TA facility, integrating and providing gender support to their investee companies. And then Lisa will talk a little bit about a G-Search project that they undertook looking at the impact of that TA. Over to you, Lisa.
Great, thanks. Do you want me to just do the intro now on Alpha Mundi or the G-Search as well?
You can do your intervention on the G-Search.
Okay.
We're going to go through and then we'll open it up.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Sorry, I'm seeing a delay on my end. Alpha Mundi has both a for-profit investment firm that manages 2 impact funds investing in social enterprises in East Africa and Latin America. And then we have a nonprofit Alpha Mundi Foundation that raises technical assistance funding from development financial institutions to build capacity in SMEs with a specific focus on gender. Not everything we do is gender, but we raise dedicated pools of gender TA. And our philosophy, it started really with me recognizing when I was on the investment side and building pipeline, we just weren't seeing enough female entrepreneurs in Africa or Latin America, and trying to figure out how we as investors could try to help build the ecosystem and get more women entrepreneurs coming up. And when I looked at where we had influence as investors, it's really at the company level. And while I think it's wonderful that there's tons of firms that are focused on deploying more money to female entrepreneurs, and we should keep doing that, I don't think we can ignore the 90% of companies that, are started by male entrepreneurs. And I think it's important to work with these companies to help them understand the importance of building a gender equality diverse team and empowering women across all aspects of the operations of the business, which over time will hopefully build up this next generation of female entrepreneurs. So that's how it started. The phrase we kind of coined was embedding gender DNA embedding gender equity into the DNA of the companies that we're working with. So Alpha Mundi invests in all sorts of companies. It doesn't have to be, founded or led by a woman, but the company has to be willing to undertake this gender work with us and acknowledge the importance of building a gender diverse company. Maybe there'll be questions on that later, but so how we did this is, and what we do, a couple of things, but we embed gender into our diligence process. We embed gender at the company, the investment committee, the board level of the fund and the foundation. And we give kind of a diagnostic survey of all our companies. It sort of serves as a door opener. And what we found is that a lot of companies think that, a lot of CEOs think that gender is really an HR thing. As long as they're hiring women, they're kind of ticking this gender box. And the survey that we give asks questions across all aspects of the business, sales, marketing, product development, finance, operations. And as they're going through and answering these questions, lights suddenly begin to go on and they're like, oh my gosh, we are selling a lot of products to women and we don't really have any females on the design team. So that sort of is our door opener. And, from that survey, we start to already, even at the time of, doing diligence and closing the deal, identify, areas where we might be able to help support them with gender. And then if we have technical assistance funding to do so, we engage in a conversation with them. We worked with Value for Women to actually implement the technical assistance. We present menus of options. And I think the key to getting the buy-in from the companies is making it a business first proposition. So really talking to CEOs and helping them understand that, hey, look, by doing these things, you're going to achieve a better financial and social return. So take the product design one, for example, solar lighting company, half their customers are women, but they didn't have any women on the product design. So, you know, getting women involved in that process and seeing how we can fine tune things, how we can shift our sales, you know, how we can do our marketing, our collections, et cetera, involving women across the board is actually going to result in better, you know, operational return as well as social impact for them. The G-Search project specifically was a consortium of 6, us and 5 other like-minded investors who were doing similar things. And the goal was to really start building the business case and collecting data to prove that gender equity leads to better financial and social outcomes. So we brought, you know, 30 plus case studies of companies that received interventions. We collected data sort of pre-intervention and post-intervention. We worked with the William Davidson Institute at the University of Michigan to analyze the data. I'm sure we can share the results. If you go to the William Davidson Institute and Google G-Search online, there's a ton of resources and toolkits. And, you know, correlation is not causation, but we did have some very positive findings linking these types of interventions to better social and financial outcomes. So it was a first step, something we want to continue the work on. And, you know, I think also in the Q&A or later on in this, I can talk about some of the lessons we learned from doing all this TA. So I think I'll pause there.
Okay. Thank you, Lisa. No, and I think that that's important. I mean, you weren't actually here earlier in the week, but there's been a lot of conversations around the role of data and particularly operational data and making that case from, you know, starting with the business case and pulling in information and data and working with the institutions and to the key to making it meaningful and, you know, kind of from the start in those discussions. I'll move over now to Casper Wanselman, who's the Director of Asset Servicing at Investing for Development. And Casper, they're launching a new fund, the FEF, a Female Entrepreneurs Fund for the CCAT region. And Casper, if you could talk a little bit about, introduce the fund and what the impetus was behind this GLI specific fund, given your history working in a range of cross-sectoral funds, and why the focus on a GLI specific vehicle. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Dina. I think for us, it's really a journey, and I think we are on that journey. I don't think we are at the final point of that journey. And if we step back, I mean, we managed the Luxembourg Microfinance and Development Fund focused on second and third tier MFI since 15 years. And yeah, so this sort of promise of microfinance is good for women development was sort of always almost explicitly in the room. We collect data on how many women do we serve, and we know the majority of customers we ultimately serve are women. I mean, this, and you know that this is a metrics which get very widely reported. If you go to any fund today, probably you're going to find it somewhere on the cover sheet, on the fact sheet published. But I think it's clear that that is not good enough, and that the thinking shouldn't stop there. And that sort of triggers then the process. How do we go further? And I think that ultimately, among other things, led to an engagement in the Female Entrepreneurship Fund. But I think the first point is to sort of think about it. We think about it in 2 dimensions. So we need women in finance. We need to care about representation. And we care about the second bit, which is what does the finance do for women? No? And if we think about the first thing, I think it's very helpful to start with yourself, no? And the immediate intermediation chain you are interacting with. And I think there's homework to do. I mean, if I think of our board, it could improve in terms of gender share. Yeah? And I think it's good to have these things conscious and start talking about them and be honest about them. Of course, the IC for the gender fund has a very nice balance, but the ICs for some of the other funds don't necessarily have. So to be honest about these things, to consider them, to think about them. And then do the next step, which is the very logical step, is to think, well, how is gender representation across the institutions we finance? We finance a fair number of microfinance institutions, financial service providers. And what you find is a typical hierarchy. The further you move up, the less women there are. So what do? I think you should probably start to ask questions. You should start to think about that. We are now forced by SFDR to collect gender pay gap data. I think that's very helpful to look at it, to discuss it. What's an acceptable gender pay gap for an institution? What's unacceptable? Where do these limits lie? We recently had a case where an institution which had 75% women clients, very vocal on women development, had 0 women board representation. Is that acceptable? We thought it was not, so we wrote them a letter saying, why do you intend to address that? I think these are sort of the low-hanging fruits. These are sort of the basic things you can do. You can sort of get moving. And then you sort of come to the finance for women, and we started looking at, I think, one very basic metrics, which is, okay, the majority of the institutions we finance have mainly women clients. If you look at average loan amounts, disaggregated by gender, how does the picture look like? And you find almost systematically that the average loan amount for men is somewhere of the region 20, 30, 40% higher than for women. And so it tells you, it materializes the abstract gender gap we talked about before, you know, this huge potential. And sort of it materializes that there seems to be in the organization these built-in biases, these built-in obstacles that we come to equal outcomes, because apparently the larger the loan amounts, the higher you move up in the segments, the less women clients you have. I mean, it's behind that very simple metrics. No? I think, again, we're talking about low-hanging fruits. It's good to start to look at that data, collect it, track it. How does it move over time? To start to internalize it in a very mainstream way, whether gender lens investing is explicitly your focus or you just in a mainstream approach. And I think we're on that journey. Now, the Female Entrepreneurship Fund is there to sort of do the next step. What do we do now to engage in a process to change that? And to change that, you look at all these barriers, and a lot were mentioned, biases, barriers. Why do 1 in 3 women do not apply for a loan in the first place, whereas the ratio for the men is 1 in 5? This is now data from Central America, which we have looked at. Why is the rejection rates for loan applications with women higher than men? Why is the average granted amount for women smaller than for men, particularly in the SME segment, etc.? I mean, all these things which sort of the cumulative effect of these built-in biases in the institutions. And how do you engage with an institution into a process to change that? And that's not an easy process, because that is a lot of different factors. Again, representation matters, product design matters, 2 very complex things, like what is the built-in biases in a credit algorithm? So that really very good, and then you're quite out there. I think for that, we recognized in the FEF that technical assistance is extremely important. You cannot just say, you know, I finance you and you figure out your way. I think you have to go that way. You have to accompany it. You have to support it. You have to sort of share that vision and do it together. Maybe I'll stop there.
Okay. No, thank you. That's a lot. And I think, you know, the point you made about having your own house in order as an investor is a very important one, and that, you know, it's easier to make the case to your investee companies if you can also show what you've done yourself and the importance in your own internal gender strategy and your own KPIs around gender diversity, equity, inclusion, as well as how gender is integrated into your impact thesis, whether you're a GLI focus fund or whether you are a sort of a sectoral fund that wants to be, you know, gender integrative. So I think that's important. And with that, I would maybe hand over to Noémie Renier, who's the head of debt at Incofin. And Incofin is one of 3 fund managers that is now partners under the GGSF, which is, I saw on the internet, the world's largest gender lens investing fund now. And Noemi, when we were talking about you also, maybe we could start just a little bit about Incofin's own gender strategy and how you kind of looked at that internally and how that's influenced some of your conversations with your investee companies, and you can talk a bit about the ambitions of GGSF.
Thank you, Dina. Yeah. Maybe if you don't mind, I will
Flip it.
maybe flip it. Yes, I think it's more interesting. Maybe just traveling back in time. So in 2009, the microfinance enhancement facility was created. The MEF, we call it, was created to address urgent liquidity crisis in the aftermath of the financial crisis. And that mission was fulfilled through the microfinance enhancement facility. Even further during COVID times, the fund could provide liquidity to the microfinance sector. And as the maturity of the fund loomed in 2025, the primary stakeholders, investors of the fund, recognized another urgency. Juana, Florian, and Wesselina mentioned earlier not only it's the right thing to do to invest in women, but it also it makes business sense. But there is also the urgency that was recognized, because as a matter of fact, it will take another 136 years to close the global gender gap, according to World Economic Forum. 267 years just to close the economic participation gap. And I don't know about you, but I don't have that time. And so that's basically the urgency that investor recognized. And thanks to the instrumental pivotal support from the investor of GGSF, BMZ, KfW, IFC, OEB, but also the instrumental support, coordination effort of Impact, acting as AIFM of the fund, and with the origination capacity of 3 portfolio manager, Incofin, Triple Jump, responsibility, but also the gender expertise of NIRAS, Women World Banking, acting as TA provider of the fund, GGSF was born, the Global Gender Smart Fund, largest gender fund, indeed a global mandate with 530 million today, an ambition to go to 700 million. Not enough to close the gap that was mentioned by Juana. We talk about trillions still that are missing today, but at least it's the path in the right direction. And the fund has one mission, is to provide responsible finance to women-led, women-owned enterprise to women, but also to improve female leadership at the level of this organization. And you mentioned it, Dina, intention is a starting point, but how do we translate that intention into practice? And the beauty of GGSF also is that it has been built around 3 key pillars to build a very rigorous framework to make sure that intention is not only word or the 10th topic of a panel during Microfinance Week. And so there are 3 pillars. The first one is a holistic gender assessment framework. The second one is gender action plan, to make sure that there is a commitment to go beyond. And the third is data tracking. So for the first point, the gender assessment framework, the fund has partnered with Equilo, which is a platform to collect data that is aligned with the best practice of the 2X Global. And it's 109 indicators on average, because it's depending on the assessment of the institution and their profile, but 100 indicators that allows the institution to assess their practice, to benchmark their practice, also based on their own regional context. And that's a starting point, gender assessment for the institution. And then based on this gender gap assessment, we engage with the institution in order to identify, agree on what would be the area for improvement and the area for action. And the fund agrees with this action plan with the institution. And not only we asked institution to go beyond, but also we accompanied the institution through technical assistance with a partner. The fund has already availed 4 million of technical assistance and is ambitioning to raise further 10 million of technical assistance available for this institution. And last but not least, because what Get Measure gets done, data is one of the key pillars to really understand how we reach this impact. The fund is also tracking several KPIs to make sure that we achieve the gender ambition of the fund. That being said, there are quite a few challenges when it comes to implementation and translating this framework into practice. The first one is the context, because we need to understand, and that's of course really the starting point, that barriers to financial inclusion for women, they differ significantly according to the legal framework, cultural framework, social norms that are in place, but also legal rights that they may have access. And so it's critical to understand, to avoid shortcuts. It's easy to say in institution, maybe you should launch a specific project for women, but what are the needs? It was interesting, we were discussing with a partner from NERAS yesterday that actually there was a study from WSBI in India that shows that 70% of women don't feel comfortable sharing their own KYC data with a male agent. And they will use the KYC data of their own client because they don't want to share that with a male agent, for example. But at the same time, sometimes the barrier may just be legal right to a land. As a matter of fact, today, on 20% of women own less than 20% of the world land, but they represent half of the population. 2.7 billion of women are legally restricted from having the same right as men. And so this can translate into barriers to access financial inclusion. And I think it's very important, and a reflection I had also over the last 2 days hearing from many panels. At the origin of financial inclusion, we are convinced that responsible financial inclusion is key to prevent over-indebtedness. There is a responsibility of the financial inclusion sector to prevent over-indebtedness, but there is also a responsibility when we talk about gender-smart financial inclusion to make sure that the financial inclusion does prevent financial abuse as well. And so it all starts with really understanding the need of the woman to make sure that ultimately the woman also owns the decision of the loan. And in that context, all the partners, the stakeholders, the investment manager implementing GGSF have been trained on GBV, for example, gender-based violence. And at the beginning, I can tell you that our investment team, we were a bit wondering, why are we trained? And when we go on the ground to meet with our investee, and why are we trained about gender-based violence? And then they start understanding, yes, indeed, financial abuse. There can be some violence in gender. And I think it takes a long way, and maybe that's a second challenge that we face, that actually, if you want to be serious about your gender lens, you need to devote time and resource. I mentioned the Equilo tool is 109 indicators. You have been through this at the Promorare, and it takes time for the financial institution, for a team to assess, review, understand, translate that into an action plan. And that is critical to take that time if you're serious about it.
And maybe we'll,
yes,
can we, I'll circle back to the other one after, if we can. I just want to bring the technical service provider perspective in maybe now, and then we can open up the floor. But I think that, a very important point that both you and Lisa made is sort of the need for diagnostics and really understanding the context-specific gender considerations and issues facing the investee companies, and also meeting them where they are and kind of identifying where the low-hanging fruits are, but also where they can be more aspirational and go beyond and plug the gender gaps with action plans and the like. And so if I could, I'd like to introduce Toma Gonzalez-Burgos, who works for Promorare, and they've got over 30 years of experience working as a financial institution provider and also now a TA provider. to hear a bit the experience as being that service provider who's trying to translate some of these global commitments around 2X and some of these new tools that are being rolled out, which I think, we're still modifying and coming to agreement on what the right tools are. But what has, your experience been providing a gender TA? And I know you focus much more on direct SME and corporate rather than financial institutions, but you can, talk a little bit about you both. And maybe what have some of the challenges been, but also what incentives you've used or what strategies in kind of rolling out some of this TA.
Sure. Thank you very much, Gina. And thank you also, Lisa, Noemi, Gaspar, and everyone in the previous panels for your inputs. I'm very happy what I'm listening to, what I'm hearing, what I'm learning, because apparently we already have all the tools, all the questions, and all the answers. The importance of putting the house or the internal organizations first when mainstreaming gender, so that then the strategies could be more robust, more easy to implement. I'm hearing as well the importance of data collection, to go to territories, to gather data, to ask the audiences, those women, which kind of products and services they are expecting from the financial providers, what are their needs in terms of guarantees, in terms of how long those credits or loans need to be when put in place, and more. And I think this is great. We're having great conversations, and as a TA, as a representative of a TA provider area at ProMujer, that's also a microfinance institutions in Latin America. It's great to hear that we are actually moving forward. For anyone thinking that even though we are we need more than 100 years or more than 300, depending on who you ask, to bridge the gender gaps, we can say that at least we are moving forward. There are lots of answers here, and what we do at the Gender Knowledge Lab of ProMujer is very much the same from what we were saying before. The importance of, as Lina was saying, translating all this information to the practitioners, how we can move forward in integrating the gender lens, not only as financial institutions, not only as corporates, but when we are moving towards territory, towards investment, how we can put all this information or adapt this information when working with MSMEs, with women-led MSMEs, with non-women-led MSMEs in those countries where we operate. How the importance, as Noemi was saying, of contextualizing. It's not the same providing TA or investing in Brazil, Argentina than in Guatemala, Nicaragua. Speaking about Latin America, just to put that region as an example, the importance of understanding those nuances, those gray areas that we need to understand if we are planning to actually provide a service and planning to do it correctly in a proper way. But I see lots of answers here. I see that we are moving forward. I see that the discussions are being more and more smart in terms of how to move forward. I'm very happy to see that the why, it's always in the discussions, numbers, percentages. We are moving towards the how, how we can, if we already understand why, which is evident, but we still need to continue improving and showcasing the importance of the why, investing with a gender lens. We are now having discussions towards, okay, which are the best practices on the how. But still, as we were seeing from what, for example, Juana was presenting before and other reports, when we ask the ecosystem, is gender a priority? Are you doing something in this regard? Answers are not that clever or not that straightforward. We still see that there are lots of gaps and things to be done apart from us being here, for those FIs, those corporates, those MSMEs that are not interested or don't know yet how to move forward in that direction. And that's where TA comes in alliance and in partnership with other stakeholders to help to translate, to adapt that information, and to actually start creating those gender action plans or roadmaps to become more gender smart, and by becoming more gender smart, becoming more intelligent in terms of business and more responsible in terms of social impact. What we do at the Gender Knowledge Lab is to work with almost every stakeholder across the capital spectrum and non-financial stakeholders as well, to help them to go through down this line, understanding this how, this why, going towards the how, and we still face, as we've seen before in other presentations, lots of challenges. No, maybe what I can add to what has already been said, which is a lot, and thank you for that as well, is like the lack of, maybe not in this room, but in other rooms, yes, lack of institutional maturity. The idea of maybe understanding the why, but then doing enough towards the how. I mean, just keeping that information for panels or for impact reports, but not moving enough in depth when proposing actually changing the DNA of their own organizations in terms of gender. It should not be just like a few sensitization workshops or a few policies of co-creation, but actually try to embed this perspective and change the DNA for a long-standing approach and for being sustainable in time. The difficulties to connect the gender vision with the financial institution strategy in this same regard. As we have heard a lot, the underutilized sex or gender disaggregated data, as Kaspas was saying before. Now we do, in many cases, we do have that information collected, but we don't know how to use it. In another challenge related is the difficulty to understand the potential market opportunities the risk of losing market by not understanding or correctly using the gender disaggregated data. But on the other hand, the opportunity to actually gain market and gain financial and profitability or good results in terms of finance, if we start collecting correctly and using that information in intelligence to our product, services, strategies, and more. How do we use this information towards more or a better or more smart product and services design is key, and it's something that we do face as a challenge when we work with multiple stakeholders across the capital spectrum, because once again, the idea maybe it's understood, but then it's complicated, like to translate that into a proper or correct action plan towards the implementation of those ideas. Lack of time, lack of knowledge, very important, lack of budget. There is not enough money internally being invested towards a real and sustainable transformation. And from our perspective, and tell me please to wrap up, the idea is to help them to face, to understand by diagnostic by the gender action plans creation and also implementation of the TA, understanding and identifying these particular challenges, because now we are speaking in a general way, but each FI, each MSME, each corporate organization has their own challenges, and by understanding through a tailored approach or through an honest conversation, those challenges, and proposing and providing tailored and very focused solutions for each of those potential challenges. I'm going to wrap up here and continue if there are more questions, but thank you very much.
Thank you, Thomas. No, I think that's great. I mean, all of you had so much to say, and I think, a key part of this, and we heard this earlier in the week, as well as the important role of technical assistance in really, working with partners, investee companies, and meeting them where they are, but moving them beyond. And how do you do that? And I think, one of the things though around the how is that there's still a lot of practice, like variations in terms of how impact investors are seeing, achievement of gender lens objectives, as well as investee companies. And some are using a more holistic approach that looks both institutionally at diversity, equity, and inclusion within the institution, and then rolling out into the market in terms of products, services, delivery, communication strategies, all of that. And others are saying we just do a product, or others are just saying we're working on, leadership and employment only. And so there are a lot of different ways. I mean, and that's fine. We're moving towards, I think, some kind of standardization. Particularly, there's going to have to be something around indicators and how we're measuring it. But it's as long as there's in my opinion, a clear, coherent strategy, and it's clear how investors are approaching it and what they measure as success and how they're defining it and aligning it with 2X or other kinds of frameworks, and then following through on indicators and measurements in more than just a storytelling way, but actually what's the data saying and what are all the data points? And, we don't have to overdo it and make it so burdensome that it tempers interest and slows things down, but we can get beyond. I mean, we've been collecting the same metrics for a really long time, and there's more data that is available that can be used in how we think about how we're defining success. So I'm sorry, I said we were going to have so much time, but I'm opening it up now. We're going to stop and have questions directly to the panel. Please don't forget we have a panelist online as well, Alpha Mundi, and unfortunately it goes back to like the flat screen and you can't see her, but now you see her. So please, questions from the floor. Or comments from any of the impact investors who are with us, who want to add something. A lot of different perspectives were brought up. Yes, there's someone in the back.
Hi, Aude Montesquieu from FinEquity at CGAP. I just wanted to flag, that's why it's a comment and not a question, that we've been working with several of you to put together a resource guide with really a curated list of tools around gender lens investing for supporting women-led MSMEs. So they're tools by GIZ, by BII, by 2X Collaborative and others. And we've just launched this tool very recently, and we'll be promoting it with the e-MFP in the early December. But I just wanted to say it's a living tool. We've just created it, and we'd love to continue enriching it as new tools become available. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Yes.
While we're waiting for more questions to come in, I mean, we're here. This is Microfinance Inclusive Finance Conference, and I think with this topic, there's sort of the real question around data, and where will this be sort of a separate world, or should part of the data collection efforts also be mainstreamed across the tools we have as an inclusive finance sector? It's obvious we're not all going to move at the same speed in this topic, and there are funds like the ones we heard about whose explicit mission is to move maybe somewhere quicker than others, but sort of maybe keep in mind, let's stick to this spirit we always had of creating this common metrics, common understanding, common platforms to say, these are the KPIs, this is where they can be collected, measured, shared, discussed, improved, so that we all can move forward.
Fully agree. No, and I think that's, it's kind of some of the more interesting work that we've done is working with impact investors who are not specifically GLI, but they want to do something on gender, and they know that the industries or the types of companies that they're investing in have a gender impact or risks if they're not considering gender at the front, and they can be doing more, and they want to understand sort of what are the key indicators, and they have data, and even just collecting sex disaggregated data on whatever impact metrics they're already collecting goes so far. And I don't think it's fair to put all the burden of gender lens investing on gender lens investment funds and vehicles, because as we talked about, the assets are just a tiny portion, but thinking about it more broadly about mainstreaming some of these discussions, reporting, transparency on gender data, it's very important. And and thinking across and maybe and I think that Alpha Mundi's experience is really interesting in taking, a gender integrated across, and how I'd like to maybe, while we're waiting for another question, hear a little bit more about sort of, one thing I was thinking about was the case of the business case kept coming up in our conversations, and that, rolling this out was still a struggle. We need more on the business case, but I feel like we've been making the business case for a really long time. And I wanted to ask Lisa, the G-Search findings, if I understand it correctly, was really looking at like TA and the benefits of TA to investee companies and some strong case studies out of that. So was that effective at all in terms of kind of mobilizing more resources around the business case for gender integration, and what did you find from that?
I think so. I mean, the goal is to ultimately, have companies dedicate their own time and resources for this, right? And that involves, though, building the business case for it. So you have to prove that there is an ROI on investing in these things. And I think we're still working on that, which is why I think there's still concessional capital that is needed. Because when you're an entrepreneur and you've got a million competing priorities, this one obviously doesn't always bubble to the top. But I think the more we can demonstrate the positive social and financial returns from doing it, then the more commonplace it'll be. And I kind of liken it to, the environment and where we're at with just, clean practices in general, and think about building energy efficient buildings. I mean, 20 years ago, this was kind of a burden and the business case wasn't proven out, but now we've seen that there's, positive ROI to actually doing this and embedding clean energy practices, and your business actually does better. So I hope we get there with women and with gender as well. One of the biggest things that we heard, which was not necessarily intended, but companies, a lot of the CEOs reported having an easier time raising money when they were doing it. I mean, I think we've seen really a proliferation of gender lens investing vehicles over the last 5 years or so. And, these vehicles are looking for pipeline, for gender forward, women funded companies. So a lot of the CEOs reported that other investors that were doing diligence on them really saw this work as a positive, and they were able to raise more money. And then, the social returns were very clear. There were the feedback across the board. We did what's called this Net Promoter Score of the company, and employees, after doing the work, just felt more loyalty for their company, felt, there was just a better culture, more inclusive. And when you start looking at things like turnover and the cost of turnover and hiring, these are all factors that play in again to that bottom line. So yes, I mean, the TA is good. Companies, I think, can do a lot of this on their own, but we still sort of need to get over that hump of getting started and how to do it. And, there's more organizations helping. Value for Women is the one we use. They can't do everything. I actually, though, had a conversation with their CEO yesterday, and, they've been working on developing a lot more tools that kind of have a lighter touch, where companies can go on and get, some basic support and diagnostic and access to some of these things online without actually paying for the customized technical assistance. So even just taking these diagnostic surveys, I think, kind of opened a lot of doors and gave companies a lot of things to think about. And we did have some companies that didn't move forward with the TA because they didn't have the resources, but they sort of did the diagnostic survey. They took, they kind of internalized what needed to be done and said, yeah, we're going to get to this. We don't have the resources now, but this has been really helpful. And, hopefully they came back to do it more later. So.
Can I react to that?
Yeah.
Maybe a bit provocative, Lisa, if you allow me.
Yeah.
I'm under the impression that there is a lot of research that proved the business case. I mean, it happened to us several times that we need to make the business case till in 2024, that we need to justify why it makes sense to invest in women. But I find that there exists a lot of data that prove that diversity at the governance level leads to better environmental performance, better performance of companies in general. Although I do agree that we need to make this data available to many organizations that do not see yet the value, as you mentioned, that they have a lot of data, but that hasn't created the business opportunity. And while I do strongly believe that we need the strong intention with funds like GGSF, of the Female Entrepreneurship Fund, it's really critical. We do believe, I think, that we also need to implement that gender lens across all investments. So from agriculture to financial inclusion, water segments, whatever the product or the funds and the intention, we try to apply that gender lens to really better understand the gender impact. And I think that should just normalize it. As I said, and we emphasize, Thomas, it takes time, it takes resource, but that is the only way to normalize that gender lens across all the investment continuum.
And is that what you're doing at Incofin now? There is a sort of a high-level gender strategy and a commitment to integrating gender across all the funds?
Yes. I don't want to monopolize speech, but you asked me a question. I don't want to look like I'm avoiding the question about our house.
The walk, talk the talk.
Maybe I avoid, but actually I'm quite proud to say that I do believe, although we believe there is still a journey again to get better. I do think we are quite good in that sense. That it's up from the board level. We have 38% of women representation at the board level, all the way down to 57% of female staff at Incofin, and senior manager is a little bit above, around 55. We have gender disparities in our investment committee. We have 75% of women in our IC. Sorry. So in terms of representation, we have the ambition to reach full parity across the organization by 2025. And we have implemented across the company diversity, equality, and inclusion policy. And that takes various dimensions, but also trying to track data internally to understand when an employee leaves, is that linked to specific gender factors or not? And so really try to track and understand. And we have appointed head of DEI in order to really understand in our survey, we track specifically diversity and inclusion and equality factors. So we continue. We also had a hard look in the mirror when we decided to integrate that gender lens in the company, across the company. And we did do a diagnostic, also an assessment of how good are we doing. We had the support of Value for Women that provided us technical assistance, interviewed many staff, and also provided a training, not only to all the staff about the unconscious bias, but because that's why you do it, basically this type of diagnostic, is that you believe you're good, but actually, because if you look on paper, yes, 38% of women at the board, it's not so bad, but are there some bias I haven't seen? And that was the purpose of having these technical assistants. That was very helpful, that interviewed several staff across the company to understand where can we do better to offer better opportunities.
Data, your own data, very good. Yeah. Excellent. Any other questions for that? Yeah, please.
Benedict Wahler, Consumer Centrics. Quick question. We talked a lot about banks, about microfinance, so people who hand over debt. You don't get a seat at the table like with management. If we talk about venture capital, if we talk about private equity, you do get a seat of the table. So I wanted to see if in the GSF, private equity, VC, like those who are on the equity side, share the upside, are part of what you're doing, and whether in that space where you discuss where the interests are aligned with upside, the role of women in creating value is emphasized both in the staff, but also on the client side, right? We talk a lot about the purchasing power, women as the financial managers of households, whether that's an angle that comes out in your work. And if anyone knows about data in that space, I'd be excited to hear.
No, it's an excellent question. I think it's something that is, sorry if I answer, but GGSF, to answer very shortly, it does provide debt and subordinated debt, no equity. We do leverage on the local anchorage of financial institutions to themselves target women entrepreneurs with the diverse instruments that are available locally. That's, but we do agree that it's critical to incubate more women-led businesses locally. That's complementary.
Yeah, the FEF has also, through its history, it comes out of a TA program, which already been running a number of years. It has also this direct support window that you said, okay, I want to reach women-led and women-owned SMEs through financial institutions, but I also want to open this support channel that they get direct encouragement, support, training, whatever they need to progress in their entrepreneurial ventures. And sort of to feed it also bottom up, no? Because we all know you can work with financial institutions and it's very powerful mechanism, but it takes time. And sometimes it's also good to sort of feed it from the other side, that you work with the entrepreneurs directly to understand their challenges, to understand from that side, how is the relationship with the financial institution.
Thank you, Barbara from Mercy Corps. It came up a little bit, these connections between, well, financial services, but also other investment asset classes from your perspective. And my question is, I mean, a lot of barriers that women face as entrepreneurs, as individuals, as family members, they can be linked to finance, but they're also linked to the opportunities in the employment market, in education, in you name it. So to what extent in your investment thesis do you try to create those links? And do you have any examples of where you unlock potential thanks to those links, but also maybe where you hit the barrier because it's just beyond the scope of what you can do as investors? Thanks.
I don't know because I know you're both starting at the beginning, so maybe either Lisa and do you want to take that one?
I mean, I definitely have examples. So Alpha Mundi invests across sectors. I mean, on one financial inclusion company that we supported was actually during COVID, and the barrier that we found when we looked at the data, it was a microfinance company that did a lot of loans, but then also education to the women, well, to everybody. But the women actually consumed the education at higher rates than the men. And when the in-person courses stopped, there was this big barrier that was being met, or this big barrier they faced. So, what we did was A, kind of help identify this, but then B, worked with a company to digitize things. And we interviewed the women, and then by creating all this digital content and delivering through WhatsApp and through cellular, this allowed the women who, even pre-COVID couldn't attend the classes because there were barriers of other things they had to do in the home or work. But then especially during COVID too, had a way to access all this content. And they ended up, I mean, the results were huge with it was like 90% of the female clients were taking these business and finance courses and improving their companies, their SMEs that they were, or it was really micro businesses that they were running. And the company is called Fundación Espoir. They ended up actually winning a national award for services to women in Ecuador after this. So that's kind of one option that we uncovered through doing this work, and the barrier that women faced by being able to actually access the services that the MFI was offering, and the MFI not really realizing that until they kind of dove into that, and then really changing what and how they offered it so that women could consume it. And then, I mean, just another example that's, a little different than what you said, but I mean, one of the things we ended up doing, I mean, there was an agriculture company, a coconut processing company that we were working with in Africa, and there was a really high turnover of women. And, when we started talking to them and kind of digging into what was going on, I mean, they didn't feel safe. I mean, so they women would have to leave to nurse babies. They didn't have a safe place to change. There weren't lights. So, I mean, we just did very simple things and kind of provided some funding and support to help build, a nursing room, a nursing facility, and separate changing areas, and install more lights, and kind of worked with the company around doing flexible shifts for the women so they could, come and handle other family obligations. And that really increased the retention of all of the women employees they had. So, I mean, I think just a lot of different examples of where we certainly did, I think one of the things the TA did uncover was some of these barriers that women are facing, and how we could address them. So I hope that answers the question.
No, I think that is helpful. And I think that, many of these things come through in the TA provision that you don't necessarily see it, in the gap analysis and the action plan, because that's much more at the policy level and, high KPIs. But then as you start getting into the TA, and maybe, I don't know, Thomas, if you have other examples of those barriers which I thought was interesting, Lisa, when we spoke, they're not necessarily very expensive fixes either, because this is the other thing that oftentimes we get fixated on the cost of the TA and the potential burden to investee companies, but they're often, as you mentioned, it's just being aware of what those barriers are, what those challenges are at an operational level, whether it's in terms of staff equality or supply chain gender integration or products and development. So I don't know if you have anything.
Yes, absolutely, I agree. And I think the key there, once again, is asking our target groups or audiences, what do they need? I mean, do you need just access to finance, just access to credit? Do you need I don't know, insurance kind of financial service towards education, householding, in health insurance. I mean, by asking them, or which kind of non-financial products do you need within this financial service that we're providing? Do you need skilling opportunities? For example, ProMujer, as a microfinance institution, when the loans are always offered with a holistic approach, as we call it, which is providing access to that financial credit that women in the regions and countries where we operate usually don't get to traditional banking or through traditional banking, sorry. But we offer also the skilling opportunities and health and well-being services, because we know that there are women that usually the same barriers that that prevent them from getting to the traditional banking institutions also prevent them for getting to medical like centers or medical aid. So we offer not only the financial access, but also the medical access and well-being, and as well as skilling opportunities to help them to invest the money that they are receiving, to make their businesses thrive or grow, to better expand their markets and more. But it's always asking like the final audience, like, what do you need? But because at the end of the day, it's like the intelligent like things to do. Because if we're expecting them to use that service or to buy that specific service, is there something more or easier to ask them which is your specific need? Yes, and from that data actually feed like the product and service development strategies.
Great, thank you. I've been given 2 warnings, so maybe I'll just give the panelists one last chance if you have anything you wanted to kind of highlight, take away from your experience or looking forward for these new GLI initiatives. Now would be your moment.
In my case, I would like to maybe leave 2 or 3 recommendations for the sector. On the one hand, again, thanks again for this space. I think that those FIs or companies that are moving towards a more gender approach showcase what you do, because it happens a lot, and related to what we were saying before, related to the business case, we do use aggregated data when we speak about the business case, no? The percentages, like the amounts under management. But when we get to work with the FIs or with the SMEs in the countries, is okay, but what's happening in Guatemala? I mean, who's doing what? And there it's key that if you are investing in those countries, then speak from your own experience. I mean, how is your business doing when investing in women-led MSMEs in Guatemala? So that we can foster Guatemalan FIs to get a more gender-lens approach. And also for yourselves and for other peers in the ecosystem, because peer learning is key in this regard. It's what we do with clients is like, think this as a journey. It's not that you need to run to the goal. It's more about like transforming the DNA of the company so that the change is sustainable in time. And that's something that they perceive with grace, because it's not like we're not evaluating or assessing you. You are just helping you to move towards a more long journey. So there is no need to rush. There are lots of things to be done, but little by little, it's better than none.
Thank you.
I think maybe a last word is, I wish we can see women not as one segment, but many type of segments with different needs. Sometimes maybe there is a need just for a health insurance, or just an insurance to cover maternity leave for women entrepreneur. If we speak about women-owned businesses, sometimes it can be childcare at the offices because of the lack of a system of access to childcare for women that have young kids. And so I think that's the first thing, is really to understand the needs of each of these segments so that we can serve them. And then again, it takes time, it takes resource to convince also institutions to go beyond and to understand these unconscious bias that are in the market that maybe they haven't seen, and that we can help, to unlock business opportunities.
Okay. Casper?
Yeah, I'll be brief. I'm German. We are above time. I get nervous.
I'm American. It doesn't matter.
I'm Latin, so even worse.
No, maybe on a note, a little bit of an optimistic note, because I think there are a lot more women in working in the institutions we serve. And a lot of these women are increasingly at senior management level. And I think this will give structural change. I think we're on this way to see this structural change. And I think we had a debate around momentum in this panel, and it was a bit controversial, but I would like to close really this on a more optimistic note to say, I think this momentum is increasingly there. And so there's this supportive factor that this will move forward. And so let's be part of that journey.
Wonderful. Lisa, do you have a last comment? Thoughts for the audience?
You're muted.
Cut you off.
Sorry. I assume most of the audience is already doing this because you're in the room, but if you're not, you know, just start. You know, I feel like there's always this inertia to kind of get over the hump. You know, don't ignore the companies that are founded by men. And, you know, when trying to gain buy-in from your investees or portfolio companies, I think making it like a business first argument like helps gain buy-in if you're having trouble with that. And then if there's any donors, philanthropists, DFIs in the room, you know, more capacity building and more concessional capital, I think is still needed to support.
Yeah, indeed.
Okay, thank you very much. And thanks to all the panelists.
Thank you.
Okay,